Hi, and welcome to episode 6 of the Devotional Anarchy podcast. And this is kind of an exciting episode because I'm going to be getting into the back end behind the scenes of the Sovereign Business Accelerator launch that just finished yesterday at the time of this recording. And by the time this episode drops, it will have been a week. So this is a really important episode because I'm going to touch on some key pieces around live launching, emotional leadership, and energetics that a lot of business coaches don't talk about. And of course, I'm going to be putting my somatics spin on it. So I'm going to start by laying out in full transparency some of the major things that I experienced during this launch. And I'm going to list them out, and then I'm going to come back to them and talk about them in more detail. All right. So, and I want you to stay until the end because I'm going to share a little bit of what's coming down the pipeline that I'm really, really excited about. All right. So over the 6 weeks I was launching, because I like long, lazy launches, and because I know shit blows up behind the scenes when, the best laid plans, right? So over the 6 weeks where I was launching, I experienced 2 stomach viruses, one of which came with like these COVID symptoms, like body aches and headaches and that kind of thing. I had my kids sick from home 3 times, which normally never happens, but just, it was just a lot this time. I had 2 relationship repair conversations with colleagues, one of which was a result from me being triggered and then triggering my business partner. More on that later. And then in the last week of my launch, I experienced a 40-minute trauma release, followed by 2 days of my face twitching, because you can't make this shit up. And on the morning my launch ended, i.e. yesterday morning, I fell in my fucking shower. Yes, I fell in my shower. I slipped and fell, which has never happened in my life. And I pulled the curtain rod down on my head. So I have like a bruise right here that I can feel, but you probably can't see. All right. Also during that time, I completed 5 summer camp applications. I did my taxes. I hosted and organized an overnight birthday party for my 10-year-old and 8 of her friends. I did 6 weeks of field training in finance. I did my certification training. I got a promotion from agent to associate at Vortex Financial. I did presentations. I showed up for meetings, like all that stuff, right? So that's also what happened. So I want to share with you my launch strategy because I feel like it's important to share that. So I started with a 4-day free event, like a free series events, hitting some of the major points of what the Sovereign Business Accelerator was about. And I promoted that for 2 weeks prior on social media, in my email, to my email list, and in the Facebook group. So after that 4-day free event, I let 1 week go by, and that was sort of the early bird week. And I was offering a bonus, my boundaries course, as a bonus. And I had somebody come in during that time. So, and after that week, just to kind of create momentum and build excitement, and it just kind of like came up intuitively for me, I also did a 5-day visibility and power challenge with a prize for whoever showed up the most and with sort of the biggest energy, or with the most like oomph, right? Chutzpah. And and it was just to build excitement, and it did build excitement. So I wanted that a little bit sort of in the middle of the launch. So I gave out a 90-minute intimate business intensive for the person who won. So that was exciting. And over the time, basically from the 4-day event all the way to yesterday, I sent out 50 emails to the 38 people who registered for the free event. And that included reminder emails to, like, hey, this is today's challenge, or hey, we're going live in a few minutes, right? And I repurposed those emails on social media. So I maybe took pieces of those emails and made short posts, or I just wrote out the whole, I sometimes turned that content into a reel, and sometimes I just had like a long post on social media, or I had like a carousel post on Instagram. So what I also did as part of the sales process, and this is something that I like, the intimacy piece of sales, is that I reached out to people. I reached out personally to people and invited them into the Business Accelerator. People who I saw liking a lot of my posts, people who have expressed a desire to work with me, but didn't feel like one-on-one was for them, or they had said like, yeah, let me know the next time you launch something. I reached out to some of them. And yeah, it was really great. I had some conversations, I met one person over video that I hadn't met before, that I had only talked to a couple of times. And most of those people ended up coming into the Sovereign Business Accelerator. And I also like tapped into who intuitively would be a great fit, like people who I really felt like needed to be in that space, like where the timing felt right, or where I felt like they were just at the precipice and I had already a good relationship with them. I reached out to some of those people. So it was really fun to do that. And a lot of people like, oh, that's kind of a cold sales call process. It wasn't. It was really like, it felt really warm. It felt like an invitation. And I also had I didn't have any reaction to people saying no to me. In fact, I had somebody say no to me where I felt their sovereignty, like I felt them really in tune with what they needed. And right now, they didn't need that. And that felt so good to me. And so there was no rejection. I didn't get dinged there at all. It just felt really it felt really good to hear their no, because the no was really genuine, and it was also very loving. So totally worked for me. So what also was really cool is that I was so absolutely convinced of the value of this offer that coming up with content wasn't difficult. And the passion behind what I knew was like the content and how it was not the content of like the writing content, but I knew that the content of the container, like what was going to happen in the container and the results people were going to get, were going to be so epic and so different from other containers that passion fueled the content creation. Like, sometimes we feel wobbles about like, oh, does anybody really want this? Does anybody need this? I didn't have that part at all. And that's something that happens for me sometimes. Like I sometimes question and wonder, but for this one, it was so clear, like, no, this is exactly what people need. They need the nervous system regulation work, because I see coaches talking about it all the time and they don't have half the training that I do in somatics to be able to offer that work. So I was very clear, like my position as an expert, that was so clear to me. And so I anchored in that value, both in the pricing, like the price point was ridiculously good. What I'm going to offer inside of the Sovereign Business Accelerator is ridiculously good. And so that made the mindset piece like a no-brainer for me. And I ended up not really needing to do a lot of mindset work. But I'll share a little bit later, like what I didn't need to do work around. So during the launch, I was also connecting with other friends, other colleagues that do similar work that I do, that are also embodiment experts and like shadow work experts. And so that helped keep me in alignment with my particular message and focus, because I know that, the mainstream social media and how people launch things and sell things can feel kind of superficial. And I wanted there to be a little bit more depth and nuance. Like, I know that when people are, when people are scrolling, they don't want, I'm not going to say, they do want nuance. They do want nuance. And I also recognize that brains that are scrolling don't have a lot of capacity for nuance, right? There is a desire for nuance, but not a lot of capacity to fully take it in. So there's this sort of like middle ground where you address the nuance, but you break it down into simpler pieces, into more digestible pieces, so that people can take it in and they can appreciate it, and they don't get overwhelmed by the writing or the level of language that you're sharing it in. So so I wanted to balance the simplicity piece and not have it be superficial. So my nervous system hates those 2-week open carts, like hates a short open cart, because I know that my life tends to fucking go haywire behind the scenes when I'm launching. Like, my kids notice, and then they start having more tantrums, like just shit starts happening. And it's sort of where all my drama comes out, right? So yes, I love the lazy launches. My nervous system loves the lazy launches. I get to come up with different ideas, and I get to like be creative throughout. And I also recognize that people they need more time to make a decision, right? We're all being more careful about how we invest our money, where we invest. We invested in ourselves, and we are a little bit more discerning, a lot more discerning maybe, with who we invest into, like who's going to be the guide that guides us through a particular process, right? And I want to also note the arc of the launch. This is something that you really need to know as someone who does live launching. The beginning of the launch, right? When you have an early bird bonus, let's say, there are, people who come in during that time. During the middle of the launch, it's kind of quiet. It's really quiet. And at the end of the launch, like, there's momentum that gets kicked up again, because people tend to leave things for the last minute. I tend to do that a little bit too, even though I want to keep myself more organized. But the arc of the launch is that there's like bonus at the beginning, there's crickets in the middle, and then there's momentum at the end. So because I knew that already, I focused on being creative in the middle, right? Like having a little bit of that, the challenge in the middle to build excitement, to keep the excitement going for myself and for the people who were interested. And also, I focused the middle of the launch on content creation. I was just like, I'm just going to write, and I'm just going to create a content bank for the next time that I offer this. And yes, I'll offer it differently. I will have evolved, but at least I have some foundations, some foundational content I can pull from and repurpose. Even if I add to it, if I subtract to it, doesn't matter. The ideas are there, right? So that was really, really good. And I knew I had to sustain energy for the end, right? Because you want to finish strong. And because I have a pattern, I have a tendency to drop off. And in fact, it did happen the day before the launch ended, where I was just like, fuck this shit, but I'll get into that in a second. So I knew I had to sustain energy until the end. So I kept like, like when you're running a marathon, you have to have that ending, that like, oh, I see the finish line. Oh my God, let me like speed up. That is what's happening here. Lazy launching is marathon. In the middle, you are pacing yourself. You are drinking lots of water, right? Like maybe you take some breaks, but you want to be slow and steady. And then at the end, you can ramp it up. Okay. So the ways I took care of myself during this launch, pretty much every day, with the exception of 1 or 2 days a week, I did morning workouts at the gym. And that entails getting on my fucking bike and pedaling for 40 minutes. And sometimes it's a slower pedal. Sometimes it's like, let's go kind of pedal. And for me, that is the place where I listen to music that's congruent with how I'm feeling. This is a place to sort of like do shadow work. It's a place to kind of like just metabolize whatever I wake up with through my system. And then I also combine like mindset with with weightlifting. I was going to say body work. But yeah, so mindset work with weightlifting. So, as I'm lifting, I'm feeling the strength in my body, and I'm like finding the strong thoughts that are going to guide my day. I sort of anchor in how I'm feeling, and then let the feeling choose the thoughts that I want, that I feel are going to support me. And I'm just noting also like, oh, these are the shitty thoughts. Sometimes I do journaling, but I really haven't done a lot of journaling. And throughout my day, I'm always sort of checking in with like, okay, who's at the wheel, what's operating right now, and staying attuned to what players are in the field, so to speak, who's on first base, who's the pitcher here internally, so that I can notice from what place I'm operating from. Am I operating from a wounded place? Am I operating from an empowered place? Like, how do I see my audience? Do I feel bitterness towards them? Do I feel like I love them? Do I want to empower them? Do I, like just checking in with myself about all of that, because that comes through your messaging and content. I spent a lot of time working from bed because I wasn't feeling well. I was sick twice. I just had like some digestive issues going on, folks. I did do some nature walks, which felt really good. It was like on the days where I didn't want to get on my bike again. I wanted to give myself a rest, and I wanted to just be a little slower and gentler. I definitely wore the most comfortable, soft, warm clothing as a way of soothing myself, as a way of just like being really like gentle with myself. So most of the time I wore like, dressed up at the top and sweatpants at the bottom, just because like, I just wanted to be really fucking comfortable. And I didn't want anything pinching me, pressing me, like, don't be up in my space kind of thing. I also spent a lot of time alone because I did experience some overwhelm. And I'll share that in a moment. And I needed to regulate myself through a lot of quiet time and very little stimulation, because the overwhelm was sort of an overstimulation of a lot of parts of myself. And so my regulation was like absolute silence, like nothing. And also Netflix. Like I anchored into Good Girls, watching Good Girls, and really moving my way through the series very slowly, just like, like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, as a way of like pleasure, enjoyment, and giving my mind and body a break. I also anchored in a lot of pleasure with my kids. Like, we went on a little vacation in February. We had, we made fun activities over the weekend. I did art projects with them. We're always looking for like bucket list items to check off, right? Little adventures, travel adventures. So that was great. And snuggle time, of course, and laughter and silliness. And that is always really like lightening. And then I also did 30 days of reasons you want to hire me. This was an edge for me because I tend not to amplify that part as much. I tend not to amplify, like just talk about why I'm the best person to hire. And I knew that was an edge for me. And it was an exercise of really communicating my value on a daily basis. And there were times it's like, man, I got nothing to say. And then I would come up with something, and I didn't like, okay, whether it was so great or not, it didn't matter, but I showed up for myself and I showed up for my value. And that felt like that practice felt really important. So the result of the launch, it was 6 people came in. It was a 15K launch. My aim was to have like 10 people, would have been like my wow, amazing. 15 people was my max. Like 15 people would have been like, can I really like make space for the process for all of them? But 6 people is like, love it, love it, love it, love it. And yeah, because like this container was intended to be an intimate space. It's a space where I really want for people to get seen, met, high value, high touch in a group container at a group price. So it really like met all of the requirements for me for what I wanted to offer. So now I'm going to go back over some of the emotional leadership and energetic pieces of the launch. So regarding overwhelm. So because I made some miscalculations with my schedule and because things just got backed up with my field training and finance over the last 3 weeks of my launch, I experienced overwhelm in a way that I just don't experience for most of the time, because I make sure I don't, because the way that I structure my work and my family life, there's no overwhelm, right? And yeah, once in a while with parenting, right, that stuff comes up, but I make sure that my work is really low key and manageable. But didn't do that this time. Other things got in the way, things that were out of control and things that were just like, what? You didn't think your way fully through this one. So part of the reason I was so overwhelmed also is because I'm learning new things in my finance training. I'm dealing with new information. I'm dealing with numbers, which, as someone who has numbers dyslexia, is pretty intense. And I was feeling my capacity stretched to the max. So there was one day, I think last week or the week before last, where I got triggered. And it was the one time where my fear took over and I reacted. I reacted from a place of fear. Like I could feel the fear, but it was, I could feel it there. And it was like, oh, I just want to come out. I just want to come out. I just want to come out. I couldn't hold it. And there was part of me that didn't want to. I just felt like I wanted to like let someone know. And I'm I'm sharing this experience because I feel like it's so important to really understand what overwhelm looks and feels like, and that knowing this will help you manage it better. So overwhelm looks like for me, and I'm sure it's different for every person, but what I sense is that there's a lot of similarities here. So you might relate. Overwhelm looks like get away, back off, not one more thing. I want to shut things out. I'm pulling away. I'm withdrawing. Like I'm out, shutting down. No more. I'm out of here. Done. Right. So it's a boundary. It feels like a boundary, but it's a defensive boundary. It doesn't feel like a loving, compassionate, like open-hearted boundary. It feels like I'm out of here. Done. See ya. Bye. Back off. Nope. I don't have room for it. That kind of energy. Right. So in that moment where I felt triggered and I couldn't hold the trigger, really, I felt myself really wanting to cut off. And I reached out. I left a message for my business partner and was like, yeah, like, I don't like this. I don't want this. And da 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 and da 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 in that tone of voice. And and we had to have a repair conversation the next day about like how that went down. So that was important for us to like get that established, get those norms established. And also like we got to share like, yeah, I was really triggered, and I was feeling like my autonomy threatened, and I don't like it when and so we were able to meet at the place like in a trauma informed place. So later in the last week of my launch, I shared earlier that I had a trauma release experience. So I have a particular trauma that I've known I have for a long time around technologies and numbers, because of the dyslexia, because of how my dyslexia was handled as a kid. And I felt myself touching into the overwhelm a couple of times. It would, come up. And then I'd be like, I would feel the overwhelm. I'd be like, oh, I can't do this right now. No, we'll leave this for later. And then that happened a couple of times. And finally I was doing something and I was feeling that overwhelm come up again. And I said, fuck it. I'm just going to surrender to it this time. I'm not on a video call. I have an hour to spare. And I let myself surrender to it fully. And what happened is I let myself cry. And as I let myself cry, like I started to almost like going down an escalator. I got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And the crying, the tears became sobs. I started gasping. My breathing became irregular. I started to scream. I started to speak in a voice that I knew wasn't mine. I started saying things that I wouldn't say. And so it just went like, it was spiraling in deeper and deeper and deeper. And I went into a 40-minute trauma release where I was shaking. Yes, there was it started with a conscious childhood memory, but then as it deepened, it went into ancestry and it went into ancestral memory and screaming into the pillow, shaking. And then my face was twitching for the next 2 days. And I had to, I had been showing up on live videos as part of my launch. And I was like, I don't want to do that. That just felt like I need to rest and recover and soothe and regulate. And that's what I did for the next 3 days. But that was really big. And I noticed that after I allowed that to happen, like I went back to the numbers thing. I went back to the thing that had originally triggered me. And there was no fucking charge. Like, this is the fucking miracle of trauma release work, is like, there was no charge. And I was like, yep, this is like nothing. This is not a thing. Whereas before, I mean, for decades, and I'm talking 40 decades, it had been a thing. I mean, math anxiety, fucking like up the wazoo. Okay. So done with that. It was amazing. But yes, I had to, do a lot of resting. I spent a lot of time in bed. I put on the most comfortable clothing. I talked to friends. I listened to music. I soothed myself with like really yummy food. Watched more Netflix, so really taking it slowly. And then less than a week later, the day before the doors to the Sovereign Business Accelerator closed, my oldest was sick and stayed home. And then I was triggered because I have this part of me that's like, you're in my way. You're in my way. And I need to do this. Like my will becomes sort of the way, my way. I'm in control. I'm doing it my way. You're in my way. So I observed that and I held space for it. And I was able to manage that through breathing and like just noticing that part of me that was felt really irritable and like, why are you home today? Why of all the days? And wanting to blame and wanting to be a victim. And I was like, no, this is going to be fine. I'm just going to make do, and it's going to be imperfect. It's fine. Right. And then the last day of the launch, the next day after that happened, I fucking fell in the shower. And again, I was feeling some overwhelm because it's like, it's the last day. I got to finish strong, right? I was putting myself under some pressure. I was feeling overwhelmed. And when I fell in the shower and the shower rod fucking bonked me on the head, I felt my overwhelm. I started crying and I just felt my overwhelm in that moment. And I felt like a child crying. And I was just like, and I listened to myself crying and I was like, oh yeah, that's a young part of me. And I let her cry. And then, I picked myself up, put the shower curtain back, shower curtain rod back. And then kind of like, I was feeling some tenderness around that. And by the time I took the girls to school, I was driving back, I was like, I'm feeling kind of optimistic now. I'm feeling kind of good. All right. And I feel like, and I came back in that last day and I was like hosting and feeling energized and people were coming in, people were contacting me. So I finished off in the way that I had wanted to. And the lesson that I took from it all that I want to share with you is that I let myself feel everything, all the highs and all the lows, and that in itself creates safety in the system, right? You experience pleasure from feeling it all, even the stuff that, you've made wrong, or typically it doesn't feel good, but there's pleasure in the release of it. And that making space for it creates safety, right? My solution to most things is make space for it, make some space for it. Trust you can feel it all and not die, because when your body's in overwhelm, what it's signaling to your body is like, unsafe, 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 you're going to die, you're going to die. And you're not going to die by feeling everything. So mindset work, trust you can feel it all and that you're not going to die, and that you're going to actually end up better than before you felt it all, right? When you're at the precipice of feeling it all. Stay open to the mess and the miracles. Like after I fell in the shower, like I've never fallen in the shower in my life, but there was a miracle that happened. Like I went to the low point. I'm sitting in the shower. You can imagine this, like naked sitting in the shower, like hunched over and feeling like a total dweeb. And then like coming out of that and feeling like, yes, I don't know, something just shifted, right? And I don't know what it is. It was a miracle and I'll just take it. So a lot of people go into pleasure as a way to soothe throughout launches. This is the way it's normally taught, and that works. And crying is also pleasurable. Crying is also a beautiful release, right? Avoiding overwhelm in your business isn't always a helpful strategy. Like, yeah, it's great to manage yourself, right? But if you happen to be in a place where you feel overwhelmed, allow yourself to release it. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to feel the helplessness, again, without believing that this is it. Like, that's all there is. Like, observe yourself in the helplessness. Notice what part of you is activated and show up for that part. Let them have their say. Let them have their expression. And then you keep it moving. So when you feel overwhelmed, it points to some sort of trauma, right? Some young part of you that is overcharged and doesn't have a release valve. So you want to open your capacity, open up your nervous system capacity by allowing that overcharge or that charge have a release valve, whether it's crying, whether it's stomping, whether it's having a tantrum, whether it's like, whatever, taking a run outside, whatever works for you helps you open up that capacity. So in summary, holding yourself through a live launch and regulating doesn't always look neat and clean. It's not always like journaling and, like moving my body a little bit. Like, it involves tears sometimes. It involves trauma release and like boogers and things like that. It's important for you to take away here, like the cycle of a launch, the typical cycle of a launch, like some people at the beginning, crickets in the middle, finish off strong. The importance of a lazy launch, where people are a little bit fatigued by having been promised amazing results in coaching and maybe not having gotten it, and feeling like they need to be more discerning about how and where they spend their money. And finally, surrendering to the overwhelm creates more capacity. And feeling it all is pleasurable, and feeling it all communicates safety to your system. So yeah, that's it. Those are the three major takeaways. And so I'm so glad you stayed to the end, because I want to share with you what's coming down the pipeline. So something that came through as I was launching was my next container, like the idea for my next container. And it was like this beautiful intuitive hit. And so it's going to be focused on money, trauma healing, and building abundance, both in the body and in very practical ways in your bank account. So stay tuned. Join my email list or jump into my Facebook group if you want to get first dibs on when that drops. So I've included those links in the show notes. But if you go on ishavela.com now, my website, you'll be able to download my free nervous system guide. So this free nervous system guide has exercises. It gives you sort of a rundown of how to build capacity in the system. It talks about the 6 collective cock blockers to your power and sovereignty. And so it has like exercises, actual practices on how to build more abundance and wealth in your body. So that's a little intro, and let me know if you like it. And I'm excited to see you in that container or see you in the next episode. All right, bye.